Thank you very much for joining this event. As said, it's in the framework of the ENDORSE conference. We are going to organize some regular follow-up events, presentations, webinars, demos, and so on. And they are going to be all in the context of semantics and reference data, link data as well. So for this, we chose as the first topic of the follow-up events, the personal knowledge graphs. Ivo is going to make a presentation on this, which is a quite innovative and new topic. So that's why actually this is the main reason for which we selected this, because it really fits into the purpose of presenting some new ideas, some innovative solutions in semantics and reference data. So this, the use of personal knowledge graphs can fundamentally change the way that we are managing data. It's a new way of collaborative knowledge management. And Ivo is going to present us some use cases to boost the whole ecosystem of data management. And it can also raise productivity and creativity in this field. So Ivo was also a speaker at ENDORSE, and I know that a lot of you already know him, but just a few words about our speaker today. So Ivo is a consultant and in management and data management, knowledge management. He has a lot of experience working with organizations. He's also a trainer, so he's, for example, leading the trainings of link data and link data in the European Commission. He's also an author of several books, and he is also collaborating in the working group of personal knowledge graphs. He's going to say more, of course. So I'm just going to stop sharing and give the floor to Ivo.
Thanks a lot, Annika, for the introduction. And thanks for selecting this topic, which is quite dear to me. I'll try to do a balanced presentation. Do you see my screen, by the way? Yes,
Yeah,
okay. So
yes.
I'll try to see, I had no idea who joined this presentation. I'll try to do the balanced one, combining technical and not technical aspects of personal knowledge graphs. Maybe now there is a way also to speak a common language, the language of pandemic. So I'm going to use waves, try to convince you that there are 3 waves of graphs, and we are at a very interesting moment where the first wave is declining. There is a sharp rise of the second wave, and we experience the beginning of the third wave, which probably be the wave of the real personal knowledge graphs. And apart from waves, another reason to speak the language of pandemic is that the second wave really became viral the last 2 years, as you'll see a bit later. I'm part of a working group on personal knowledge graphs, and last Friday, Jerry Michalski joined us, who said, graph is in the air. It was, I think, 10 years ago when I started more seriously working with knowledge graphs, and at that time, there was no speaking of knowledge graphs, basically, and even until a few years ago. But now the situation is different. Now graph is in the air. Now, and this adoption actually followed a different path than the computing, because the computing first appeared in the enterprises, then we had personal computers, and then these computers got connected in the web. With knowledge graphs, we started with open knowledge graphs, things like Wikidata, like the Google Knowledge Graph. And then more and more enterprise knowledge graphs started appearing. They better way to integrate applications that are in different silos by building a semantic layer on top of them, getting all the entities with persistent URIs and linking them with meaningful connections. But also some people use enterprise knowledge graphs for another trend, that is using knowledge graphs for to support models of deep learning. And in team, there are a few excellent cases of doing that. After that appeared personal knowledge graphs, especially in the last 2 years. But I think that there is some connection between these 3, which is important. At the previous talk that I had in ENDORSE, I shared a survey about the uptake of linked data. One of the reasons that it is still not mainstream was that most, if not all, of the LOD publishers, they don't use linked data themselves. And one of the reasons being that the enterprise applications do not utilize much of linked enterprise data. But another way to entice these people, because in fact, how could you make a good decision about linked data if you are not suffering the pains and enjoying the gains of using it in your daily work? And there are two ways to do that. One would be if the enterprise applications become linked data applications. The other would be if our personal data is managed as knowledge graphs. That's why I believe this would change the attitude once you see the benefits by bringing all your dispersed information into a knowledge graphs that you can create. I'll start by making two claims about personal knowledge graphs. The first one is that everybody is already using personal knowledge graphs. And the second is that nobody is using personal knowledge graphs yet. And I'll try to convince that both are true, but that would, as you may have guessed, imply a certain shift of the meaning of personal knowledge graphs, which is also an important message to convey. Not only our enterprise data is trapped in silos, but also our personal data is trapped in silos. We have bookmarks and favorites, and they are kept where we put them in our browser, the social networks. We use document presentations and spreadsheets, but inside one document, you can't search for another. You have to go outside. You cannot have an ID of part of it, and when you change it and reuse it somewhere else, it will change everywhere. The same with research, with doing highlights, collecting the metadata of the papers. There are various tools like Zotero and so on, but they just kept with great features on top on a separate silo when data and implications are coupled. Another cluster of silos is our emails, calendars, to-dos. Another cluster is our projects, and we have many, many. If we start with bookmarks, there is this area of research called personal information management. We, in fact, curate data that we're going to use at a later point. We have the expectation that this certain effort now in organizing it better will facilitate easy retrieval later on. There is a whole thing called refinding. And because it's easy to organize, it's easy to bookmark, we do it a lot. The recent study shows that 70% of people, they save frequently accessed bookmarks, websites as bookmarks. But interestingly, bookmarks are used for retrieving only 16% of bookmark sites. The rest are retrieved by other means, like reproducing the queries that were found or trying to search in the history. One of the possible reasons is that bookmarks, they fail to preserve the context of the original retrieval. And the way the context works with personal knowledge graphs is something very important. Also, what is bookmarked often is the whole page, but we're interested only in part of it. This gave rise to new species, new kind of applications doing web annotations like Digo or Hypothesis. And we also do bookmarking on social media. Quite often what we put as like or favorite has the meaning. I'm going to read it later. The situation is similar with documents. So documents usually don't have persistent URIs. Their parts never have persistent URIs. So if you have somewhere a slide or something that you want to reuse from a document, in others you cannot refer to it. You cannot in any way link it with something. And everywhere the applications and data are coupled. So you need, if I create a certain document with a certain application, you need the same application to open it. And that's similar with projects, with our email. Now, when we search in our email, we don't find our documents, we don't find our bookmarks, we only find our emails. Even when the provider is the same, which is a terrible way to achieve interoperability by having such a big vendor lock-in that is quite popular in big organizations, especially towards Microsoft. Even when it is from one vendor, still things are not well integrated. So how do we deal with this? Well, we keep in our heads these old associations between our bookmarks, annotations between our highlights, the books we read, and things that we find interesting in them, emails, calendar events, our to-do lists, presentations, documents, projects, and so on. So in that sense, we already are using personal knowledge graphs. It's just that they're tacit, they're in our heads, associations. Nodes are in different storage locations, while the associations we keep in our mind. And that is, in fact, the first wave. We have it, but it's heavily dispersed, and the associations are not explicit. Maybe I was over-optimistic to show that this wave is in rapid decline. It's definitely not. But what happened in the last 2 years was very quick eruption of tools for thought, or so-called network note-taking taken to a entirely different level. If before 2019, without counting some just standard note-taking applications like OneNote and Evernote, we had just a few tools that would qualify as personal knowledge management systems, where things have relations, and their relations are important for our interactions with these applications. And after that, something happened. In just 2 years, huge amount of them appeared, some of them gaining tens of thousands of users just in months. And most of these personal management systems, they actually work with personal data as knowledge graph. And this is how this second wave started. This is the wave of personal knowledge graph applications. It deserves a bit of a special attention. I'm going to tell you several things about it. First, some history. It has this kind of working with personal data, especially around research. It has some history, which is worth knowing because it inspired most of these applications, and especially it inspires different way of using them. And maybe then a few words, what is happening when you interact with a personal knowledge graph. There is a special dynamic interaction, which is very different than using any other applications that I know of. And then I'll share my personal experience with knowledge graphs and certain things which I missed and I had to hack a bit to serve my personal needs. Some observations about architecture and technology patterns. I will just scratch the surface, but at any point, if you have questions, interrupt me. Some other observations that put apart this whole ecosystem. And then the limitations of the personal knowledge graph applications. What I think will make this second wave go down and be replaced by a third one. And at the end, we'll talk about the third one a bit. Maybe the first real personal knowledge graph is that of Niklas Luhmann. Maybe he's, after Max Weber, the most famous German sociologist. And he had a huge influence on my work. In fact, there's a whole chapter in my last book where I explain the influence that he had on my work. So I know his writings firsthand, and he's often pointed out as very prolific writer. So he wrote 70 books and 400, but the quantity is not such impressive as the quality, the precision, the rigor there that you can find there. It's like everything is prose, but as if you read mathematics. So this drew attention to his working method. For 30 years. He was building his personal knowledge system, which was exactly like a graph in a very, very smart way. At that time, he had to do it using sheets of paper, cards, where he put different ideas and an index system, how they were related. It can grow from any point, and it can refer to any other card. And there were also keywords that had a separate index. So he built this personal knowledge graph for 30 years, having over 9,000 linked cards. The interesting thing that he observed was that this kind of system is alive in a way. It whenever you create association, it has a backlink and it appears in different contexts. You enable serendipity. You are constantly surprised and you make new discoveries, especially when you have a critical mass of things that may start interacting in a way that you had not meant and had no idea that they would, until you found all these relations to get a life of their own. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. I started seriously using this approach 14 months ago. Previously, I had another system where I gathered over 10,000 nodes, but it wasn't with the right kind of relations. So this is how my personal knowledge graph works when it's 14 months old. It has 3,000 nodes on the surface, but in fact, below it has 75,000 or more, because the granularity is such that each paragraph is they're called blocks here. I'm using Rome research. They are things with ID that can have HTTP URI, which can be linked, can appear in different contexts. Around that, there's a huge functionality that enables it to support a lot of use cases, which I'll talk now. So I'm using it for my daily tasks, for events. It's integrated with calendar, preparation, notes, task for follow-up, for research a lot, for collecting knowledge. Now my bookmarks from electronic books, from web pages, from embedded PDF documents, papers, and so on. They are linked with meaningful comments, with tags, and so on. I use it for writing, for journaling, for articles, for posts, and in some cases directly posting from there, for presentations, which I'll speak about in a minute, relationship management with everything that I have with my actual social network, for learning, for home activities, for tracking service subscriptions, for training, for managing code, and for many other things. So what actually happened, I reduced or completely stopped using applications like Microsoft Word and Google Doc. Now I'm using it only for reviews. Things like PowerPoint and Google Slides, Evernote, Trello, Plectica, and many others that I used previously. Currently, the presentations I'm doing it also from my personal knowledge graph. So what you see, in fact, as slides, these are facets from my graph. What you see as different elements, these elements are also things with there are nodes in the graph, and they have meaningful relations to other parts, and they appear in different contexts and bring this context that I'm using now also in other places with other associations. Even in many cases, the images that you see, the elements inside the image, they have their own URIs, and they're also nodes in the graph. One of the limitations that I found with these apps that they have references. So basically how they work, you normally just write things, but when you write each paragraph, it has ID, and whenever you create some entity, this entity gets a new ID, and it's linked with its context. But this new ID resolves in a web page, and this web page is also a container. So it contains its own content, which could be blocks with their own IDs that are also nodes in the graph. And it contains all places where this entity, which is currently resolved in a page, is used, showing inside the page also the context this mention appeared. Which is great, but it has this limitation that you cannot really know what kind of reference it is. In most cases, the fact that direction is not meaningful is quite limiting. In the tool that I use, which is one of these tools that appeared and inspired many others, whenever something is pointed out as entity, it can resolve in a page, and this is one of the relationships that you could have. So this could appear everywhere. So anywhere that when you start to type something inside square brackets, there is an immediate search. The reason it's immediate that because the whole graph is in memory, and you can easily point to something that you would like to reuse or create a new one. The other level is blocks, which are the components of each page, and these blocks they have a relationship, of course, with where they appear. They have relationships with their children, with their parents, and they have relationships in something called block references. So you can create somewhere a reference to the block, and you can see it in a different context with part of the content, and you can also see at which page it was created. The way you can see it is by being a reference that you can only read or being embedded. So in every place it appears, you can actually edit. And the third type of relationship is what they call attribute, which is in fact maybe properly called property, that would have a direction and a certain value, which is another thing with its URI. The interesting thing here is that whenever something appears, it always would appear in a block. And in that sense, it has this type of relationship would appear as an instance there. So things like reification are not an issue because it's something already built in. Below the surface, there are 34 relationship types, and they're easily accessible and usable. Having also in mind that this specific tool is written in Clojure, which treats the code as data, so the content that you create could be also something that would query the data itself. And what I was missing was the explicit semantics. So I tried to add a few things to have this. This is also an important aspect of these tools. Not only the tools that I was using, that they're very open to be extended. So what I did is sort of a core ontology, bringing things like class and property, subclass and same as to create different alignments, and inside something which was an emergent ontology. So whenever, for example, a type of relationship was needed more than a few times, actually it was created as such, and then I started to reuse it. And the same for types of things. So it's sort of a bottom-up thing. It is not preconceived. There is the opposite approach of normal ontology development, where you could think what are the right kind of questions, what are the right kind of things, their relationships, and then try to generalize it to test. No, here it's just the opposite. You do not maintain your knowledge graph, but whatever you observe in your behavior that is important, you start classifying just as you go. And currently I have 111 classes and 28 properties that I reuse in this ontology, which is also a strange feature because the ontologies I create in other cases would normally have way more properties than classes. And how it is used in practice, I've demonstrated in a conference recently, and I published that demo. You can see it. Kishet right in the chat, this link. This also allows this internal personal knowledge graph to be interrelated with others. And that was one of the limitations I wanted to overcome, because a lot of knowledge that is interested is outside in Wikidata, in Microsoft Academic Graph, Open Citations. It's quite a lot. Wikidata has currently over 12 billion statements, and they increase their quality as well, not just quantity. You know, the oldest one, Wikipedia and Iago, but also Google Knowledge Graph is more easy to query now, and according to the last Common Core corpus, it has almost 90 billion triples. By the way, just a few days ago, they announced their own query language, query path. I was hoping that they would still use Sparkle, having in mind that they encourage the use of JSON-LD and using schema.org, that is semantic ontology, but they seem to try a different path that may change, by the way, because this was also what happened when they acquired Freebase. They started in one direction, then changed it.
Ivo, sorry to interrupt, but we had a question in the chat, and we also have a raised hand from Matthew.
Oh, great.
So Matthew, just go on.
Yeah, hi, Ego and Anika. Yeah, for a start, if you could just copy paste that URL into chat, that'd be great, because it's not really possible to copy it. I didn't memorize it. There we are. Thank you. Could you actually show us your system? You could actually, like, rather than, I know you realize you're showing us a series of nodes which you must have organized into some sort of collection and for this presentation, but can you actually show us how it works? Is there a little peek we could have into perhaps the back office of this presentation, the notes that you made whilst to prepare this, or some sort of, because it's very theoretical presentation, but it really helps understand what you've done to actually, if you can actually see it. I mean, I understand if you don't want to show your back office to the rest of the world, but just a request.
All right, so one by one. First, I'll share the link. I have absolutely no issue sharing the back office. My point is I didn't want to point the attention to a particular product that I happen to use. The whole message is quite different. But since you asked, I will just stop this overlay. So for example, I will open one of these slides. For example, this with Luhmann. These are all blocks. So the block has, it's something that, for example, this is where, when I created it, it appears in a certain page. And that is, that I used for this presentation. If I click on some of these, you could see that each of these small blocks, it has a URI. And in fact, I can now open something just on the side. I'll bring this block reference below. And so first, you see, this is something where I can jump to another place. So it's a relation between two nodes that I can see in this way, but I can also open the context here. So you see here, I can see the context where it appeared. I don't know if this actually shows how this thing works.
I've been using Rome since, it was in beta, so I know that. I was really interested in the way you developed your own ontology and then
All right.
Like
sorry.
That's really interesting. But I mean, other people who may not be familiar with Rome, it's useful for them to see this.
Yeah. So then the ontology. Well, this is the internal ontology with the properties and classes. Here I use data log to actually get them from where they appear so that I can see now this is this 111. If I make, let's say I make a new class, I'll make it here. I can make it everywhere, basically. I can make it here. Let's say I would make a class. I don't have place. So I make a new class place. Then I have a template where I can say it is a Rome class. It also, yeah, I can also show the relations, like it might be a subclass of something. And you see now I have 112. I created an entirely different place. I have now 112 classes. So basically in this way, let me just show you some of them. For example, this is using the wrong query language. For example, in some cases, I use just icons. So this is one case I can show here to the right. So this is something for events, and I use not a string, but emoji for that to save place and to be easy to orient. And then it has different subclasses, like this is a tennis appointment, interview, conference. In that sense, whatever is special here is that this kind of entity is not it is from one side a typical entity like this one. So maybe I should show it with how they actually look. So now, so This is similar to this entity, but it has direction. So it recognizes that whatever block is on top is it works as a triple. Would be the subject, this will be the property, this will be the object, and then this property is in fact in this concrete context an instance of this type of property that is, I can open it in a separate, so you see here it appears in a separate page resolved, and I can see from here in all places where this is actually used. It was used in 50 places and so on. I don't know if this shows you the actual idea, but the thing is, because at this point it doesn't support RDF, I had to do something around it to actually imitate something similar. But this is going a step further, because now with an extension, let's say I have the concept of knowledge graph. Or let's say something more interesting. Let's say you take Paris. So this is something where there's a lot of information outside a graph. And here is an interesting way to link these things in both directions. So this is the next hack. Running from here a Sparkle query. So it asks now something seen on top as real, because it thinks that I'm interested to bring something for the upper, for the page, but no, I don't for the page, I want for the current block. Now it finds Paris, and I can even get the qualifiers. And this is actually the data imported, but also already with alignment. So I have Paris, which is here in my graph, which is same as the respective Wikidata entity. And I can ask for much more, or for selected ones, and so on. So here, these are already new entities created in my graph. So if I go to Kingdom of France, it will already have a triple that will link it with the respective Wikidata item, and so on. These are a few of the things. I don't know, Mati, if this was helpful.
Well, it's fascinating.
So I don't know if that demo was meaningful to others. So basically, this was the reason to find a way to bring data from public knowledge graphs. Some interesting thing I observed in these kind of tools, most of them, they do the processing at the client side. They bring the graph in memory, either in the cache of the browser, or many of them use the Electron app as a desktop application. Almost none is doing processing at the server. Another thing which is becoming trendy, and I think is a sign of the third wave, is the use of Markdown. Markdown appeared as quite an interoperable standard for content use. It was initially used by programmers, but now it's used more and more by non-technical people. And the nice thing about tools that use Markdown, and so one of the ways to have decoupled data and application, and one of the ways to have that you can have full control of your personal data. Also, you may start using one tool to create this content and then continue with another, and so on. So in this eruption of tools, Obsidian is the one using Markdown for content, Logseq as well. There are a few tools that are built on top of VS Code, like Foam or Dendron, and again they use Markdown. So this is something which is interesting, and that also brings the other question. Markdown is not a real standard. It's a de facto standard, but it's not a real. There are a few flavors, and maybe now there is a need to standardize it at the level of things which are needed for personal knowledge graphs. The other interesting thing is that quite a few tools are written in Clojure. It turns out that Clojure itself is like a tool for thought, and I was quite surprised to see this so prominent in this. Not only for tools like Rome or those that imitate Rome, like Athens and Loxic, but also completely different ones like Canopy, one of the few tools that actually uses RDF. What is also interesting is that while most of them, yes, they use NoSQL databases, there is one that uses Neo4j as a backend. Canopy that actually supports RDF fully, for the sake of performance, is using a standard SQL database, Postgres. But what is done quite smartly, apart from really smart indexing, is that, in fact, apart from user content and other things, the whole graph content is saved into two tables, one for nodes, one for edges. So a triple like A relates to B would have three nodes. Also, this will be a node, the relationship, but whenever it is used in a triple, it will be stored in the other table as an edge. That is also something that shows when you have something as a conceptual graph, you're quite free to use different physical paradigms for storing. Another observation is that this kind of ecosystem puts a very high importance of extension, to the point that I have talked with many users that they say that if these extensions are not there, they're not going to use the tools. I mean, for them, the extensions that they use are at least as important as what they're extensions of. And I haven't seen that with any other ecosystem. Another thing is the community. Whenever tools are evaluated, they're evaluated with the features, with other things. But here, one important aspect to choose to go this way or that way is how is the community. And there is a growing importance of the realization that you need a full control of your personal data. And so far, it is best achieved by Markdown-based applications. Following this perspective of the evolution of personal knowledge graphs, while in the first stage, the first wave, we're struggling to integrate apps, we need to keep the association in our head. In the second, we have this situation where, yes, there are knowledge graphs, and you can do fantastic things with them, but they are tightly coupled with applications. So you have much more things which are integrated, and whatever it is not integrated, you can get through extensions. Now, this extensions market is really flourishing. I mean, people are sponsoring extensions. Then it's a really very vibrant environment. Some of them are quite ugly, in fact, but they sort of respond much quicker to the actual needs of the community. One interesting thing which I find about extensions, I think they also, as those using now Markdown for their data layer, they show a trend. If they're now something additional, growing with importance, maybe in the future they will be the main thing. So this would overcome the current limitations. Now, the current limitations could be summarized as three main things. The current limitations, which is of this wave of personal knowledge graph apps, not personal knowledge graph by themselves. First is the scope. So most of your personal data is always outside. It is not connected. For example, I want to search for Pkg. And when I do that, I would like to get results from text documents that I used or wrote, PDFs, ebooks, emails, those that contain that acronym in the subject or in the body, LinkedIn, but sorted by whatever is containing that, or something that contains it and I reacted to it, Twitter, and so on. And that's currently not the case. Although more and more things can be integrated, it is sort of a centralization that still would keep most of the personal data outside. The other is, with a few exceptions, these tools still coupled with the data. And the third is interoperability. Interoperability actually has three dimensions. So if you have different parts of your personal data in different places, you want interoperability between these data stores. And then you would like any kind of application to be able to use the data the way you allow it to. But also, when you combine several applications in your workflow, you would like they to be able to work with each other. So that application interoperability is equally important. That's why I believe that just like enterprise knowledge graphs, personal knowledge graphs should be data-centric. So the data should be self-describing and should not rely on applications for the interpretation of meaning. Data should be expressed in open and non-proprietary formats, and maybe such a format can grow out of the current Markdown. So applications should be allowed to visit data, to perform their magic, and express the results of their process back in the. So I have made an interpretation of data-centric manifesto for personal knowledge graphs just to bring this point clear. In that sense, my initial claim was that at this point, nobody is using personal knowledge graphs yet, because one way or another, they are dependent of applications. And if you have several features that you like from several different applications, you cannot combine them to use your current graph. So the third wave, which is now starting, would be where you have personal knowledge graph and application. What do we see as sign that it is starting? Well, first enabler is solid. It promises an ecosystem where your data is stored the way you would like it to be stored in one or several locations, and you allow applications to use it the way you want it to be used. They don't store anything, so anything that, for example, if you have a social network and you go and like something, this like is your data, should be stored in your data pod. And interestingly, although it started from Tim Berners-Lee, so that is from the States, it is now flourishing here in Europe. Maybe that's also because of the different mindset. You have a data, sort of an American data model where data is, your data is managed by big corporations. You have also the Chinese where it's managed by government. And European, the idea here is that it should be managed by people. Now even there is something called IOP, Internet of People, that appears. But apart from solid, also different decentralized technologies like IPFS would be enables probably. And the things would not be as principles different. You would not have, if it's adopted in this direction, of course, it will not have HTTP URIs, you'll have IPFS URIs. They would work the same way or in a similar way as the HTTP URIs, but would have other benefits from the peer-to-peer approach. There's also DWeb and other similar initiatives. That's why this kind of third stage, we would indeed have the data self-describing as personal knowledge graphs, including everything, hopefully, emails, documents, the content we create, our posts, the likes of others' posts, our research sources, and our highlights, bookmarks, anything. In a self-described way, in an interoperable way, and in a way that we can control how different applications use it. And maybe these applications, they would resemble more the current a bit ugly extensions that we compensate of what is missing the way we manage our data. But in any case, the decoupling of data and applications would make our personal knowledge graphs real, and we will not only have this benefit of controlling the personal data, but we will have this big functional benefit of being able to retrieve and to associate every part of our content, no matter how it is created or how it is retrieved.